Columns of dust rose into the late summer air. From the ruins of shattered villages, German officers watched the roads fill with machines. Jeep after jeep rolled forward, engines humming in steady rhythm. Behind them came trucks, tanks, and armored cars, an endless tide of steel flowing east toward the front. The Wehrmacht was retreating in chaos. After the Allied breakout from Normandy, German units streamed back toward the Seine, desperate to regroup. Bridges were collapsing, roads choked with fleeing soldiers and abandoned vehicles. Yet what stunned the officers most was not their own disorder, but the sheer order of the enemy's advance. They had been taught to believe America was soft, undisciplined, a nation of farmers and shopkeepers unfit for modern war. But here, along the French highways, the truth was undeniable. The convoys seemed endless. Each jeep carried fresh troops, radios, or supplies. Trucks followed with gasoline, ammunition, and food. The movement never stopped. Mini hooks appeared in German diaries from the time. One colonel captured near Rouen recalled, "For hours we stood by the roadside, watching their vehicles pass. It was not soldiers that defeated us, but their factories. We realized then the war was lost." The contrast was stark. German soldiers trudged on foot, their fuel gone, their horses pressed back into service. Tanks sat abandoned in ditches for lack of spare parts. Meanwhile, the Americans seemed to have a vehicle for every man, and fuel for every mile. To the weary colonel, the passing jeeps were not just transport. They were symbols of a war machine beyond imagination. The sounds of engines filled the countryside. The steady thrum of convoys drowned out the silence left by retreat. Civilians emerged from cellars and barns, watching the Americans roll past with cautious relief. Children waved. Some were handed chocolate or gum by laughing soldiers leaning from jeeps. For the French, it was liberation. For the Germans, humiliation. According to Allied field notes, even prisoners fell silent as convoys moved by. A U.S. intelligence officer recorded, "They stared not at our rifles, but at our wheels." The Germans had no answer for what they saw. The observation captured the truth. The war in the West was as much about logistics as it was about firepower. By late August, the Seine was no longer a defensive line. It was a corridor for Allied advance. Bridges repaired under fire carried convoys forward by day and night. Jeeps splashed through shallow fords, headlights cutting through mist. The German colonel, watching from his place among the defeated, realized the Reich could never match this rhythm. Factories in America ran day and night, producing more vehicles than Germany could ever destroy. As dusk settled over the river, the flow of jeeps did not slow. Headlamps glowed in long chains, stretching farther than the eye could see. For the colonel, it was a vision of inevitability. The Reich was collapsing not only from bombs and bullets, but from the unstoppable weight of American industry. And when the night deepened and the sound of engines echoed across the Seine, one question haunted the prisoners. How could a nation they once mocked bury them under a tide of machines? The roads shook with vibration. Dust clouds trailed across hedgerows as convoys surged forward. Among them were vehicles unlike anything the Germans had ever fielded in such numbers, small, boxy, and fast. The American Jeep. To Allied soldiers, it was ordinary. To the Germans watching from ditches, cellars, or captivity, it seemed unreal. The convoys stretched for miles, each jeep loaded with troops, radios, stretchers, or fuel cans strapped to the sides. There was one for reconnaissance, another for medics, another for commanders, shouting orders above the roar of engines. The rhythm of war had become mechanical, relentless, unstoppable. The Jeep had been born from necessity. In 1940, America's Army demanded a lightweight, all-terrain vehicle that could be mass-produced. Within months, factories in Pennsylvania and Michigan were stamping out thousands. By the summer of 1944, more than 300,000 had rolled off assembly lines. What Germany struggled to build in years, America produced in weeks. Mini hooks emerged in captured officers' testimonies. One recalled with disbelief, "They had more vehicles than we had men. For every mile we marched on foot, they drove 10. His words revealed not just shock, but despair. The Jeep was not a single machine. It was a symbol of scale, proof that the Allies could fight everywhere at once. The sound was constant. Engines coughed, gears ground, horns blared. Civilians along the roadsides watched the convoys thunder past, eyes wide at the sheer flood of machines. For years, they had seen only German horse-drawn wagons and fuel-starved trucks sputtering down these same lanes. Now the Americans arrived with machines so numerous that villagers swore the columns would never end. German shortages made the contrast starker. By 1944, fuel was rationed to the point where panzer crews abandoned tanks intact. Soldiers marched barefoot when boots wore out. Radios were scarce, forcing commanders to send runners across battlefields. Against this backdrop, the Jeep's ubiquity was more than humiliating. It was terrifying. A U.S. war correspondent wrote from the front, "It is not the Sherman tank that breaks the German spirit. It is the sight of our supply lines, the little Jeeps darting everywhere, never stopping." His observation reflected the quiet truth. Mobility, not just firepower, crushed the enemy's ability to resist. The Jeep's versatility made it indispensable. It hauled artillery into fields where trucks could not go. It evacuated wounded from farm lanes clogged with rubble. It carried generals across improvised bridges and sped messengers through shellfire. Soldiers nicknamed it the GI's best friend. German intelligence called it a miracle of industry. Yet to the captured colonel staring from the roadside, the miracle was more nightmare than marvel. Every Jeep meant one less hope that Germany could regroup. Every engine meant another reminder that the Reich's war machine was broken. His men trudged barefoot in dust while the Americans seemed to glide forward on wheels without end. By dusk, the convoys were still moving. Headlights lit up the French roads in endless streams, their beams bouncing off stone walls and church towers scarred by war. For the Germans, the sight carried no comfort. Each light was another nail in the coffin of their retreat. And as night deepened, with engines echoing through the valleys, one thought haunted them. How could they fight an enemy whose strength seemed measured not in battalions, but in convoys without end? The colonel stood at the edge of a farm road, his hands bound loosely with rope. Dust stung his eyes as another column of American vehicles thundered past. The noise was unrelenting, engines grinding, gears clashing, the sharp calls of drivers shouting above the roar. For hours it did not stop. He had commanded men across half of Europe, from the fields of Poland to the snows of Russia. He had seen columns of panzers roll toward battle, their steel clattering like thunder. But never had he seen anything like this. Jeep after jeep, truck after truck, the procession stretched beyond the horizon. It was not an army passing, it was an industry on wheels. The colonel tried to count at first. Dozens, then hundreds. He gave up when the dust blurred the line into a single moving river. His adjutant, captured beside him, muttered under his breath, "They have more wheels than we have rifles." Neither man laughed. Many hooks emerged in his later testimony. He confessed to interrogators, "It was not the tanks that defeated us, nor the airplanes. It was the sight of those vehicles. An enemy that can move forever cannot be stopped." The words reflected the moment when defeat ceased to be tactical and became inevitable. The sensory shock was overwhelming. The steady thrum of engines drowned out birdsong. The air reeked of gasoline and oil. Villagers stood by the roadside, their faces streaked with soot, waving cautiously as convoys sped past. To them, the machines meant liberation. To the colonel, they meant something far heavier: the death of Germany's illusion of supremacy. For years, he had been told that American production was wasteful, that their soldiers were soft, their commanders inexperienced. Yet here, in the heat of August, he watched an army in motion that defied every assumption. Vehicles loaded with radios, medical stretchers, crates of ammunition, all organized, all relentless. Captured notes from German staff officers described similar reactions. One wrote, "Our tanks are lions, but their supply lines are oceans. Against this, lions starve." It was a recognition that the war had shifted from battlefields to factories, and Germany's factories were burning under Allied bombs. The colonel felt the humiliation keenly. His own division had retreated on foot, boots worn thin, horses pulling empty wagons when fuel ran dry. Men slept in ditches, their uniforms stiff with sweat and dust. And now, standing powerless, he watched an enemy who seemed to waste vehicles as if they were matchsticks, an abundance so vast it mocked German sacrifice. By evening, the light faded, but the convoys did not. Headlights flickered on in perfect succession, cutting long beams through the French countryside. The line of vehicles stretched into the night, a chain of light and noise that seemed endless. The colonel closed his eyes, but the sound of engines still pressed into his ears. Later, in his cell, he wrote a single line in his diary. "The war was lost the moment I saw their roads." And on that August night, as the convoys rumbled eastward and the horizon glowed with the beams of 1,000 headlights, he realized that Germany's armies had been defeated long before their soldiers laid down their arms, defeated by the endless road itself. The village streets were rubble. Roofs sagged. Church bells lay cracked in courtyards, and the air smelled of plaster dust and smoke. Along the roads, people gathered, farmers in patch coats, children barefoot, women with baskets clutched in their arms. They waited, silent at first, until the noise arrived. Engines. Dozens at once, then hundreds. A roar rising from beyond the horizon, carrying with it dust, exhaust, and the metallic clatter of steel. The first jeeps came into view, windshields streaked with mud, radios crackling as American drivers waved to the crowd. Behind them, trucks, tanks, ambulances, and endless convoys of supply vehicles thundered forward, the lifeblood of the Allied advance. To the villagers, the sight of liberation was real. Children ran to the roadside, hands outstretched. Soldiers tossed candy and gum, their laughter cutting through years of silence. Old men doffed caps, women waved handkerchiefs, some weeping openly. For the first time since 1940, French roads carried not occupiers, but liberators. Mini-hooks appeared in civilian diaries. One woman wrote, "The machines did not stop. All night, all day they came. I thought the road itself would break under their weight." Another recalled how her son returned home clutching a bar of chocolate, proof that life could hold sweetness again. But for German prisoners who marched along the same roads, the experience was humiliating. Under guard, they shuffled in columns, forced to watch convoys overtake them. Every jeep that passed was another reminder of a war Germany could not win. They saw the cheers for Americans and felt the sting of silence, or hatred, directed at themselves. Some prisoners lowered their heads. Others stared, hollow-eyed, at the flood of machines. A colonel muttered bitterly, "This is not an army. This is a factory in motion." His words captured the despair that convoys etched into the minds of men who once believed in the invincibility of the Reich. The sensory contrasts were stark. For civilians, the smell of gasoline meant freedom. For prisoners, it meant defeat. The thunder of convoys was greeted as music by villagers, but as a dirge by the captured. Eyewitness reports described German soldiers flinching at the cheers of children, each shout a reminder of loyalties they had lost. The French, too, remembered. For years earlier, German columns had marched down these same roads, boots striking cobblestones, bayonets flashing, engines sputtering. Now in their place came endless Allied vehicles, fresher, faster, louder. It was not only a reversal of occupation, but a demonstration that the balance of power had shifted forever. At night, the convoys did not stop. Headlights stretched into the distance, glowing strings of white across ruined landscapes. Civilians leaned from windows or gathered at crossroads, watching the endless chains of light. Some whispered prayers, others simply stared. According to one priest's letter, the night itself belonged to them. The roads glowed as if heaven had descended on wheels. For the prisoners, night offered no relief. They lay in fields or barns, listening as the engines roared past into the dark. The sound was inescapable, a constant reminder of the unstoppable force closing around them. By dawn, The convoys were still moving, kicking dust into the air that settled on ruined roofs and prisoner columns alike. Liberation for some, defeat for others. And as the sun rose over France, the roads became more than paths of travel. They were stages of history, carrying joy, bitterness, and the weight of a war whose outcome was now undeniable. Engines growled through the night. Convoys of trucks sped down muddy roads, headlights covered with slits to hide them from enemy aircraft. Tires sprayed gravel and mud, drivers hunched over wheels, eyes red from exhaustion. The Red Ball Express never stopped. Supplies had to reach the front. Behind the thunder of tanks and the cheers of liberation, there was another war, silent, relentless, and decisive. It was fought not with rifles, but with gasoline, spare parts, food, and tires. Every Jeep and Sherman that rolled across France carried the invisible signature of thousands who never fired a shot. Mechanics in muddy depots. Quartermasters counting crates. Clerks stamping orders late into the night. The numbers told their own story. By autumn, American forces were consuming more than 800,000 gallons of fuel per day in Europe. Ammunition shipments measured in thousands of tons. Bread, meat, and canned rations fed millions of men. Trucks carried it all, through rain, through wrecked villages, through roads still cratered from retreating Germans. Mini-hooks appeared in accounts from both sides. A German officer captured near Aachen admitted, "We fought the enemy at the front, but the true battle was lost on their roads. Their trucks came like rivers, and rivers cannot be stopped." His words echoed what Allied commanders already knew. Firepower meant nothing without fuel and food. The Red Ball Express became the artery of the Allied advance. African-American drivers, many from the segregated service units, manned the majority of the convoys. They drove day and night, sleeping in cabs, repairing trucks on the roadside under fire. Diaries from these men spoke of exhaustion and pride. One wrote, "We carried the war on our wheels. If we stopped, the front stopped." The Germans, crippled by shortages, could not comprehend the scale. Their army stalled when fuel ran dry, tanks abandoned where they broke down, horses harnessed again to wagons. Meanwhile, American convoys seemed endless. According to one French villager's testimony, the trucks passed for 3 days without pause. It was as if America itself was rolling across our land. The logistics war extended beyond roads. Rail lines were rebuilt under fire. Portable pipelines carried fuel from ports to depots. Engineers threw up bridges in days to replace those blown apart. Each link in the chain was fragile, yet together they formed an unbreakable rhythm. For soldiers at the front, the convoys were lifelines. A rifleman near Metz remembered the sound of trucks as the sweetest music in war. Bread, cigarettes, and letters from home arrived in canvas sacks. Warm clothing appeared before the first frost. None of it happened by chance. It was the product of an invisible army working just beyond the fighting. Yet the cost was high. Drivers were killed by ambushes, accidents, and exhaustion. Supply men worked without glory, often underappreciated by combat troops. But historians later argued that without them, the war in France would have stalled in weeks. Victory rolled not just on tracks and treads, but on schedules and manifests. By winter, the roads of France were scarred with ruts from endless convoys. Villagers could still hear the echo of engines long after they had passed. For German prisoners, the sound was haunting. For the Allies, it was proof that war could be won not only with courage, but with relentless, grinding organization. And as the convoys roared into the dark, their lights stretching into infinity, one truth became clear. The road itself had become a weapon, and its rhythm was victory.